Maple Creek Estates had been my home for 12 years. I purchased my modest 3-bedroom ranch when the housing market favored buyers, following my divorce when I needed a fresh start. The neighborhood represented everything I wanted: quiet streets lined with mature oak trees, well-maintained homes with character, and neighbors who actually knew your name. Mrs. Patterson across the street always shared her garden tomatoes in summer. The Gonzalez family next door would clear my driveway when snow fell before I even woke up. Our community was never the most luxurious in town, but it had heart. Most residents were middle-class workers, teachers, nurses, small business owners, who took pride in their properties without obsessing over perfection. The Homeowners Association fees were reasonable at $125 monthly, covering community landscaping, snow removal, and maintenance of our small but adequate clubhouse with its modest pool and playground. The HOA leadership historically consisted of retired residents who approached their duties with common sense. Mr. Jacobson, our previous president, always said, "We are here to maintain property values, not micromanage lives." Problems were resolved through conversation rather than confrontation. Financial decisions were transparent, with detailed newsletters explaining how our fees were utilized. My salary as an electrical systems specialist for a local manufacturing company provided stability without excess. I could afford my mortgage and the reasonable HOA fees while setting aside a modest sum for retirement and occasional vacations. Not wealthy by any measure, but comfortable enough. I maintained my home meticulously. The garden beds along my front walkway were my particular pride, filled with native perennials that bloomed from spring through fall. Everything changed when Mr. Jacobson announced his retirement from the board after 15 years of service. Several candidates stepped forward, but Victoria Harmon campaigned most aggressively. She had moved into the neighborhood only 18 months prior, purchasing one of the larger corner properties which she immediately began renovating extensively. Her campaign promises included elevating the community profile and modernizing amenities to compete with luxury developments. The election turnout was dismally low. Only about 20% of homeowners bothered to vote, mostly Victoria's friends and the newest residents who had purchased at peak market prices and wanted amenities to match their mortgages. Victoria won by a narrow margin and wasted no time appointing allies to the board. The first warning signs appeared subtly. The community newsletter changed from informative to promotional, featuring glossy pictures of high-end neighborhoods. Violation notices for minor infractions increased: grass half an inch too tall, garbage cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours, unapproved holiday decorations. The maintenance crew that had serviced our common areas for years was replaced with a more expensive landscaping company that, I later discovered, was owned by a cousin of one of the new board members. None of these changes raised significant alarm at first. I noticed but dismissed them as the enthusiasm of new leadership. Even when Victoria began driving through the neighborhood in her new luxury SUV, making notes on her tablet about properties requiring attention, I simply avoided her rather than confront the shifting atmosphere. The day everything truly changed arrived in my mailbox on a perfect autumn afternoon, the golden sunlight contradicting the shadow about to fall across our peaceful community. The envelope bore the official HOA logo, a stylized maple leaf that had once represented our community spirit but now felt like a corporate brand. I opened it while standing at my mailbox, expecting the usual monthly newsletter. Instead, I found an official notice printed on heavy cardstock. "Notice of fee adjustment," the bold heading announced. My eyes fixed on the number buried in the second paragraph. "Effective next month, quarterly HOA fees would increase from $375 to $1,125. A 300% increase, without warning, without vote. I read the document 3 times, certain I had misunderstood. The justification cited necessary infrastructure improvements, competitive amenity enhancements, and property value preservation measures. The language was deliberately vague while implying urgency. A spreadsheet attached showed projections for community benefits that would more than offset the increased contribution from residents. My hands trembled as I calculated the impact. The new fee structure would add $3,000 annually to my expenses, money I simply did not have without sacrificing my retirement savings or taking a second job. For many of my neighbors on fixed incomes, this would be catastrophic. My phone began buzzing with text messages within the hour. Did you see this? Is this legal? We cannot afford this. An impromptu gathering formed on the Miller's driveway as residents compared notices and expressed disbelief. By nightfall, someone had created a neighborhood chat group, and an emergency community meeting was scheduled for the following evening. The community center parking lot overflowed when I arrived 15 minutes early. Inside, the usual orderly rows of chairs had been hastily expanded to accommodate the unprecedented turnout. I spotted Mrs. Patterson, her normally cheerful face drawn with worry. "I live on Social Security," she whispered. "This will force me out of my home." The room hushed when Victoria entered, flanked by 4 board members. Her appearance was meticulously crafted: designer blazer, perfect makeup, hair styled as though for a corporate presentation rather than a neighborhood meeting. The contrast between her polished presence and the worried faces of residents in their work clothes and casual attire could not have been more stark. "Good evening, residents of Maple Creek Estates," Victoria began, her voice projecting practiced authority. "I understand there are concerns about our recently announced Community Enhancement Initiative. Tonight, we will walk you through the vision that will transform our neighborhood into the premier residential development in the county." A slideshow flickered to life on the wall behind her. Images of Mediterranean-inspired water features, a completely rebuilt clubhouse with fitness center, and landscaping that belonged in luxury magazines filled the screen. As Victoria narrated each slide, her enthusiasm contrasted sharply with the growing tension in the room. "The outdated infrastructure of this community has been neglected for far too long," she continued. "Our electrical systems, plumbing, and amenities fail to meet modern standards. The previous administration prioritized low fees over necessary improvements, leaving us vulnerable to declining property values as newer developments outpace us." I studied the cost breakdowns briefly displayed on screen. Something did not add up. The electrical system upgrades, my area of expertise, were budgeted at nearly triple reasonable market rates. Similar inconsistencies appeared throughout the financial projections. When Victoria finally opened the floor for questions, I stood. "I work in electrical systems," I stated calmly. "The projected costs for those upgrades are grossly inflated. Additionally, our electrical infrastructure was comprehensively updated just 7 years ago according to the newsletter archives. Can you explain the discrepancy?" Victoria's smile remained fixed, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "I do not believe we have the benefit of your professional assessment in our planning," she responded, voice dripping with condescension. "Our consultants have provided detailed reports on the inadequacies of all systems. Perhaps you are thinking of routine maintenance rather than the comprehensive modernization required." She moved on before I could respond, pointing to another resident with a question about the water features. Later, When pressed about the lack of community vote on such major expenditures, Board Treasurer Michael Simmons cleared his throat nervously. According to Bylaw Provision 12.3, the Board maintains executive authority to adjust fees as necessary for community preservation, without referendum when safety or property values are at risk. The meeting adjourned with stunned silence rather than resolution. As residents filed out, I overheard Victoria speaking to a board member. "They will thank us when their home values increase. Some people simply resist progress." I walked home alone through darkened streets, calculating impossible numbers and feeling the weight of impending financial crisis. Something was very wrong in Maple Creek Estates, and the traditional channels of community governance had clearly failed. Morning found me surrounded by paper. HOA bylaws printed from the community website, financial statements from previous years, and my own household budget spreadsheets covered my kitchen table. I had taken the day off work, determined to find a solution before the first increased payment came due in 4 weeks. The bylaws proved to be a labyrinth of legal language designed to protect the association rather than individual homeowners. After 3 hours of careful reading, I found little recourse. The board indeed held surprising power to increase fees without community approval under several broadly worded provisions. Selling my home quickly was not an option in the current market, especially with pending fee increases that would need to be disclosed to potential buyers. By midday, I had scheduled an appointment with Patricia Goldman, a real estate attorney who offered discounted initial consultations. Her small office above a local coffee shop smelled of old books and fresh coffee. She listened carefully, occasionally making notes, as I explained the situation. Unfortunately, homeowners associations in this state have been granted extensive authority through legislation, she explained after reviewing the documents I brought. Courts have consistently upheld their right to increase fees when they can demonstrate community benefit. The language in your bylaws regarding property value preservation creates a particularly powerful loophole. But a 300% increase without warning, that cannot possibly be legal, I protested. Patricia sighed, removing her reading glasses. The increase itself is not illegal, though the manner in which it was implemented could potentially be challenged on procedural grounds. However, she glanced at her watch, litigation would cost significantly more than the increased fees, even if multiple homeowners contributed to legal expenses. And during proceedings, you would still be required to pay the new rates or risk liens against your property. I left her office with minimal hope and a $75 invoice I could ill afford. That evening, I invited several neighbors to my home to discuss options. Jeffrey and Maria Rodriguez from 2 doors down, Mrs. Patterson and Tom Wilson, a retired accountant who had lived in the community since its development, gathered in my living room. "We cannot pay these increases," Maria stated flatly. "We have 2 children in college. This would force us to choose between their education and our home." Mrs. Patterson nodded. "I have lived here for 27 years. Where would I go at my age?" Tom Wilson cleared his throat. "I have been reviewing the financial statements. There are irregularities beyond just the fee increase. The landscaping contract was awarded without competitive bidding to Green Valley Enterprises. I researched the company. It was incorporated just 3 months ago, and its registered agent shares Victoria's last name." Her brother-in-law, Mrs. Patterson, confirmed. "I overheard her mentioning him at the community picnic last summer." Potential conflicts of interest provided a glimmer of hope, but when I suggested organizing formal opposition, fear crept into the conversation. "Victoria has already targeted homes with documented violations," Jeffrey pointed out. The Rodriguez family at the end of Oakwood Drive received a foreclosure warning over holiday lights they failed to remove by January 2nd. The previous board never enforced such trivial matters. "We cannot afford to become targets," Maria whispered, "not with everything at stake." By midnight, my visitors had departed without concrete plans, only promises to keep sharing information. I remained at my computer, frustrated but determined. If traditional routes offered no recourse, perhaps I needed to understand more about Victoria herself. Her campaign materials had emphasized her professional background, but details were sparse. At 2:17 a.m., bleary-eyed from hours of searching, I discovered an old community newsletter from Victoria's previous neighborhood celebrating her professional achievements. The article mentioned her electrical engineering background with emphasis on power distribution systems. Something clicked in my memory. Maple Creek Estates had an unusual power infrastructure. Unlike most developments where each home connected directly to municipal power, our community had been built with a central distribution system maintained by the HOA, a legacy of its original development as a planned community. The next morning, I visited the county record's office. After 2 hours navigating bureaucracy, I obtained copies of the original infrastructure plans. The documents confirmed my suspicion. Our neighborhood power grid operated through a central facility located behind the clubhouse, with distribution nodes serving clusters of homes. Maintenance responsibility fell entirely to the HOA rather than the power company, which only supplied electricity to the main transfer station. As I studied the schematics, I noticed recent modification permits filed by the HOA board. Among budget allocations for critical infrastructure, electrical system maintenance funds had been dramatically reduced and redirected toward cosmetic improvements. The system that Victoria claimed needed comprehensive upgrades was actually being financially starved, while money flowed to visible amenities. For the first time since receiving the notice, I felt something beyond desperation. I began taking detailed notes, my professional knowledge allowing me to understand vulnerabilities and maintenance requirements the average homeowner might miss. If Victoria wanted to play with power, perhaps it was time she learned that electricity flows both ways. The first payment deadline loomed like an approaching storm. Rain pounded against my windows as I reviewed my financial situation for the 100th time. My savings account showed $4,270, comfortable as an emergency fund, but insufficient to sustain tripled HOA fees beyond a few months. Retirement accounts could be accessed with substantial penalties, but that option represented financial suicide for my future security. I had applied for a home equity line of credit as a temporary measure, but the bank officer had frowned when reviewing my application. "With these new HOA fees," he explained gently, "your debt-to-income ratio exceeds our lending parameters. I am sorry." The mail arrived with grim punctuality. A bright red envelope stood out among bills and advertisements. Inside, the message was unambiguous. Final notice. Your quarterly HOA payment of $1,125 is due within 72 hours. Failure to render payment in full will result in immediate filing of property liens and commencement of collection proceedings, including potential foreclosure actions, as permitted under bylaw provisions 18.4 through 18.7. No payment plans or exceptions will be considered at this time. The signature at the bottom, Victoria Harmon, President, featured an elaborate flourish that somehow communicated both authority and pleasure. That afternoon, I drove to the HOA office housed in a small building adjacent to the clubhouse. The receptionist, A young woman I had never seen in the neighborhood looked up with practiced politeness that failed to reach her eyes. "I need to speak with someone about the fee increase," I explained. "My payment is due, but I cannot pay the full amount immediately. I would like to request a payment plan." "One moment." She spoke briefly into her phone. To my surprise, Victoria herself emerged from the back office rather than a property manager. "I understand you are having difficulty meeting your community obligations," she said loudly enough that two other residents waiting with violation notices turned to observe. "Perhaps we should discuss your financial planning in my office." The public humiliation was clearly intentional. I followed her into an office that had been completely redecorated since Mr. Jacobson's tenure. Gone were the comfortable chairs and community photos, replaced by sleek, expensive furniture and framed architectural renderings of luxury developments. "I can pay the original amount today," I explained, "and would like to arrange a payment plan for the difference while I adjust my finances." Victoria leaned back in her chair. The notice clearly stated no payment plans would be considered. The improvements cannot proceed without full funding from all residents. Exceptions would be fundamentally unfair to those who have properly prepared their finances. "The increase was announced with 4 weeks' notice," I pointed out. "That hardly constitutes proper time to prepare for a 300% increase." "Financial responsibility includes maintaining contingency funds," she replied dismissively. "The community cannot suffer because individual homeowners fail to maintain appropriate reserves." As we spoke, I noticed documents on her desk, invoices from companies named Harmon Landscaping Services and Skyview Design Group. The latter's letterhead included a residential address I recognized as belonging to Michael Simmons, the board treasurer. "I see you noticing my paperwork," Victoria commented coldly. "Board members are not prohibited from utilizing their professional connections to benefit the community. These arrangements were approved with appropriate disclosures." "When was that vote taken? It does not appear in any minutes published to residents." "Executive sessions are permitted for certain contracting decisions." She stood, indicating our meeting was concluded. "Your payment is due in full by Friday. I suggest you explore lending options or liquidation of assets rather than expecting the community to accommodate your financial limitations." Outside her office, I watched as Victoria climbed into her new luxury SUV, its cost certainly exceeding a year of my salary. As she pulled away, I overheard her speaking loudly on her car's speakerphone about finalized arrangements for a European vacation. The contrast between her lifestyle and the financial distress she inflicted on residents like Mrs. Patterson burned in my chest. Driving home, I passed 3 properties with foreclosure warning notices prominently displayed. The Abernathy House, with unauthorized flower beds planted without prior approval. The Chen family home, where a basketball hoop had been erected without permission. The Jackson residence, where vintage holiday decorations had violated the newly instituted modern aesthetic guidelines. That evening, surrounded by technical manuals from my professional library and community bylaws, I discovered something the casual reader might miss. Section 24.9, Governing Utilities Maintenance. The association holds sole responsibility for maintaining electrical distribution infrastructure to ensure uninterrupted service. Failure to provide adequate maintenance constitutes material breach of fiduciary responsibility. I highlighted the passage, my engineering mind already connecting this legal obligation with the redirected maintenance funds, the vulnerable points in our aging electrical system, and Victoria's own professional background. She knew exactly what maintenance was being neglected while she funded cosmetic improvements. She understood the risks, and she had chosen to ignore them. The foreclosure notice fluttering on Mrs. Patterson's door, a woman who had baked cookies for neighborhood children for decades, solidified my resolve. My kitchen table transformed from a place of despair to a planning center. If the board could selectively enforce rules and obligations, perhaps it was time they experienced selective enforcement of the electrical infrastructure they had deliberately neglected while collecting our increased fees. The depression that had weighed on me for weeks lifted, replaced by calm, methodical determination. I would not become a victim. I would not abandon my home. I would not stand by while vulnerable neighbors suffered. If Victoria wanted to play with power, she would soon learn what happens when the lights go out. My spare bedroom transformed into what could only be described as a war room. The walls displayed enlarged electrical schematics of Maple Creek Estate's distribution system, annotated with my professional observations. Years working as an electrical systems specialist had given me knowledge most homeowners lacked: understanding of load balancing, circuit protection, and the critical importance of regular maintenance for aging infrastructure. Our neighborhood power system was unusually configured. Rather than individual homes connecting directly to municipal power, our development utilized a central distribution hub behind the clubhouse. From there, underground lines fed 5 substations, each serving approximately 20 homes. This centralized system was efficient when properly maintained but created vulnerabilities if neglected. I spent evenings tracing wiring paths throughout the neighborhood, confirming what the schematics suggested. The clubhouse, community amenities, and, not coincidentally, the homes of all 7 board members connected through a single substation. This arrangement had likely evolved from the original development phase when board members lived in the model homes clustered near community facilities. Victoria had redirected nearly 70% of electrical maintenance funds toward cosmetic improvements. My professional assessment identified numerous concerning issues resulting from this neglect: corroded junction boxes, outdated circuit breakers that had not been inspected in years, and improperly sealed conduits now vulnerable to water infiltration. More disturbing was what I discovered during evening walks with my phone camera, discreetly documenting conditions. New decorative shrubs had been planted directly over access panels. Fountain electrical lines had been installed without proper conduit protection. The backup generator system, critical for emergency lighting and security systems, showed clear signs of neglect, with fuel lines compromised and battery banks past replacement dates. While photographing a particularly egregious safety violation behind the clubhouse, I witnessed a landscaping crew installing an elaborate water feature. Supervising the work was a man bearing strong resemblance to Victoria, same prominent nose, same authoritative stance. The invoices I had glimpsed in her office suddenly made sense. Harmon Landscaping Services was collecting substantial fees for cosmetic work, while essential safety maintenance went unfunded. My research expanded to financial documentation. Through public records requests and careful review of published HOA financial statements, I compiled evidence of what appeared to be systematic self-dealing. Companies owned by board members or their relatives had received contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars without competitive bidding. The decorative street lamps being installed throughout the community cost 3 times market rate. The clubhouse renovation had been awarded to a construction company, incorporated just 2 weeks before the contract signing. All this occurred while critical infrastructure deteriorated. The central distribution hub itself had been cited in 3 separate engineering reports as requiring comprehensive inspection and component replacement. Reports now buried in archived sections of board meeting minutes no longer accessible on the community website. The linchpin of my developing plan came from a careful review of state electrical codes and municipal regulations. By law, electrical infrastructure serving multiple residences required regular inspection and certification of compliance with safety standards. Failure to maintain these standards constituted a serious violation, one that municipal authorities would respond to immediately if documented. I created detailed maintenance records highlighting the scheduled inspections and replacements that had been deferred. Side-by-side comparisons showed the funds that should have maintained these systems now diverted to cosmetic projects benefiting board members financially. The evidence was damning when viewed comprehensively. My technical knowledge allowed me to identify the specific circuit groupings and protective systems that served board members' homes and community facilities. These systems shared a common vulnerability. They had been configured to prioritize these essential facilities during partial outages, but this priority routing could be legally accessed through maintenance panels for necessary service. I developed a simple plan. During the upcoming gala celebrating the community renaissance Victoria had planned, I would access the maintenance panels through proper channels, using my key as a homeowner, and initiate a protective shutdown of compromised systems. No laws would be broken, no systems damaged. I would simply trigger the protective features designed to prevent catastrophic failure when maintenance thresholds were exceeded. Thresholds clearly documented in the manufacturer's specifications, but ignored by the current board. The selective nature of our power infrastructure meant most homes would retain power, while the clubhouse and board members' residences would experience protective shutdowns. The backup systems, neglected despite my documented maintenance requests, would predictably fail to engage. I created sealed envelopes containing financial documentation, maintenance records, and evidence of apparent conflicts of interest. Each included contact information for county inspectors and the district attorney's office public integrity unit. These would be distributed at precisely the right moment. The final component involved selective communication with trustworthy neighbors. Using encrypted messaging, I prepared guidance for residents who had expressed concerns but feared retaliation. They would serve as witnesses to maintenance issues, documenting conditions, and reporting their experiences with the board's selective enforcement and financial decisions. My calendar showed the upcoming gala circled in red, Victoria's celebration of community transformation, scheduled exactly 1 week after the first crushing payments were due. The timing seemed fitting for her lights to go out just as she raised her glass to toast her vision for our broken community. The evening of the gala arrived with perfect spring weather. Victoria had spared no expense, at our collective cost, to transform the clubhouse into a showcase of opulence. String lights illuminated newly landscaped pathways leading to the entrance where valet parking attendants, another unprecedented expense, greeted arriving guests. I dressed modestly but appropriately in slacks and a button-down shirt, maintaining the appearance of a cooperative resident while concealing my true purpose. A messenger bag slung across my shoulder contained documentation, tools appropriate for legitimate maintenance access, and a small camera to document conditions. Nothing illegal, nothing that would constitute tampering or vandalism, only the equipment necessary to trigger safety protocols already built into our electrical system. The clubhouse glittered with excessive decorations. Crystal chandeliers, newly installed at a cost documented in my financial records, cast prismatic light across marble flooring that had replaced perfectly functional tile. Catering staff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres far beyond the reasonable budget of a community association. Display boards showcased architectural renderings of future improvements that would presumably require even further fee increases. Victoria held court near the center of the room, resplendent in an evening gown more appropriate for a charity gala than a neighborhood function. Board members orbited her like satellites, each dressed to impress rather than connect with the community they ostensibly served. Residents attended in far fewer numbers than normal functions, many unable to afford proper attire or unwilling to celebrate changes destroying their financial security. "Quite the transformation," observed Tom Wilson, the retired accountant, appearing beside me with a grim expression. "I calculated the per-person cost of this event. It exceeds our previous annual holiday celebration budget by 400%. "Everything according to plan?" I asked quietly. He nodded almost imperceptibly. 7 residents ready to present documentation to authorities. Mrs. Patterson has already spoken with the county inspector's office. They expressed significant concern about deferred electrical maintenance. "And the envelopes?" "Distributed among trusted neighbors. They understand when to share them." As Victoria tapped her glass for attention, I slipped away through a side door. The maintenance access required no forced entry. As a homeowner, I possessed legitimate right of access to utility areas. The room contrasted sharply with the opulence outside: dust-covered equipment, cobwebs in corners, and clear signs of neglect despite the critical systems housed within. My flashlight revealed exactly what I had expected based on my research: circuit breakers showing corrosion, outdated components well past replacement dates, and maintenance logs with no entries for over 9 months. I photographed each violation methodically, documenting the dangerous conditions before proceeding. Inside, Victoria's voice carried through the ventilation system as she addressed the gathered crowd. "Tonight, we celebrate the beginning of Maple Creek Estate's transformation into the premier community it was always meant to be. The vision my board and I have implemented will ensure property values reach unprecedented heights." I accessed the main distribution panel, locating the specific circuits I had identified through careful study. These circuits served only the clubhouse and board members' homes, separate from lines providing power to other residences. Following proper procedure for maintenance inspection, I tested the integrated protection systems designed to prevent catastrophic failure. As expected, the systems registered dangerous tolerance exceedances, clear evidence of neglected maintenance. Following established protocol that any electrical professional would recognize as appropriate, I initiated a protective shutdown sequence. This was not tampering, but the triggering of existing safety systems designed to prevent fire or damage when maintenance thresholds were exceeded. The timing proved remarkably precise. Victoria had just raised her champagne glass, declaring, "To progress and prosperity," when darkness enveloped the clubhouse. The abrupt transition from brilliant illumination to complete darkness elicited gasps and confused exclamations. Emergency lighting, which should have activated instantly, remained dark, another victim of redirected maintenance funds. Through the maintenance room window, I observed the chaos unfolding. Security personnel fumbled with flashlights. Victoria's voice rose above the confusion, demanding restoration of power. Outside, streetlights continued functioning normally, as did lights in most neighborhood homes. Only the specific circuits I had inspected were affected by protective shutdown. "This is outrageous," Victoria's voice carried through the darkness. "Call the maintenance company immediately." The maintenance company she referred to, another entity with family connections to board members, would be unable to address the fundamental safety violations that had triggered protective systems. Only certified inspectors could reset systems after documenting and addressing the underlying maintenance deficiencies. As confused guests began moving toward exits, my allied neighbors discreetly distributed the prepared envelopes to key community members. Each contained evidence of financial irregularities, maintenance neglect, and apparent conflicts of interest, along with contact information for appropriate authorities. I continued documenting conditions, preparing comprehensive evidence for county inspectors, when the maintenance room door swung open. Victoria stood silhouetted against emergency flashlights, her expression transforming from frustration to shock as she recognized me. "What are you doing in here?" she demanded. "Documenting safety violations," I replied calmly, holding up maintenance records. As a homeowner with legitimate access rights, I investigated concerns about deferred maintenance. The protective systems activated automatically when tested, exactly as they should when dangerous conditions exist. "You sabotaged the power," her accusation echoed against concrete walls. "No, I followed proper inspection protocols for systems showing clear signs of neglect. The systems shut down automatically to prevent potential fire or electrical damage. These logs show no maintenance for 9 months despite manufacturer requirements for monthly inspection." I gestured toward the equipment. The funds allocated for this maintenance were redirected to decorative improvements while safety systems deteriorated to dangerous levels. As security personnel arrived behind her, I stood my ground, maintenance records and documentation in hand. "Perhaps you should explain to our neighbors why emergency systems failed to activate, or why maintenance funds were diverted to companies owned by board members' relatives. The county electrical inspector will have similar questions when they arrive tomorrow morning." Victoria's face reflected something I had never seen before, the first flickers of genuine fear, as she realized the carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. Dawn broke with unusual activity throughout Maple Creek Estates. County vehicles lined the clubhouse parking lot. Electrical inspectors, code enforcement officers, and representatives from the district attorney's public integrity unit responded to multiple resident complaints filed overnight. News vans parked along community entrances, reporters attempting to piece together the story of power failures and allegations of financial impropriety. I stood calmly beside Tom Wilson and Mrs. Patterson as we provided inspectors access to electrical infrastructure and documentation of maintenance deficiencies. The county's chief electrical inspector, a gray-haired man with decades of experience evident in his weathered face, shook his head repeatedly while examining the central distribution hub. "This equipment should have been replaced at least 2 years ago," he stated, making notes on his clipboard. "Maintenance logs show consistent service until 9 months ago, then nothing. That coincides with your board leadership change." "Exactly," I confirmed, providing copies of budget documents showing redirected funds. Maintenance allocations were reduced by 68%, while cosmetic improvement budgets increased dramatically. The companies receiving these new contracts appear to have connections to board members. Throughout the morning, residents emerged from their homes, many carrying folders containing violation notices or financial records. The collective evidence painted a damning picture of systematic financial mismanagement and selective rule enforcement, targeting vulnerable homeowners while infrastructure deteriorated to dangerous levels. Victoria arrived shortly before noon, accompanied by an attorney. Her carefully maintained composure had faltered, hair imperfectly styled, clothing hastily selected rather than meticulously coordinated. Her attempt to take control of the situation failed as inspectors continued their work without acknowledging her demands for privacy. "These allegations are completely unfounded," her attorney announced to gathered residents and media. "The board has acted within its authority to improve community amenities and property values. Last night's unfortunate power disruption resulted from tampering by disgruntled residents resistant to progress." The county electrical inspector looked up from his clipboard. "Ma'am, the systems shut down due to integrated protective features responding to dangerous levels of maintenance neglect. No tampering occurred. These are automated safety protocols functioning exactly as designed to prevent catastrophic failure. Your association has been operating with critical systems in dangerous condition for months." By mid-afternoon, preliminary findings had been documented. Safety violations required immediate remediation before power could be restored to affected areas, including Victoria's home. Emergency generators for critical systems had failed inspection entirely, requiring complete replacement. The estimated cost to address deferred maintenance exceeded the entire cosmetic improvement budget by 30%. The district attorney's representative conducted interviews with board members separately. Michael Simmons, the treasurer, emerged from his interview visibly shaken. By evening, he had provided written testimony regarding financial arrangements between board members and contracted companies. 3 weeks later, an emergency community meeting convened in the school gymnasium, as the clubhouse remained under repair. The county court had appointed an interim board comprised of established residents with relevant professional backgrounds: accounting, property management, civil engineering. Victoria and 3 board members faced civil complaints, with criminal charges under consideration pending further investigation. The interim board presented a transparent financial assessment. Fee increases were indeed necessary, but at reasonable levels, approximately 15% rather than 300%. Maintenance would receive priority funding with cosmetic improvements deferred until infrastructure achieved stable condition. All contracts would undergo competitive bidding with strict conflict of interest provisions. A properly announced election took place the following month with unprecedented resident participation. The new board, led by Tom Wilson as treasurer, and including representatives from various neighborhood sections, implemented transparent processes for all decisions. Monthly financial statements became public record. Maintenance schedules were posted in the community newsletter with actual completion dates documented. Victoria sold her home quietly and moved from the community before legal proceedings concluded. The remaining board members reached settlements requiring restitution for improper contract arrangements. Residents who had received foreclosure notices for minor violations had these actions dismissed by court order. 1 year later, I sat on my front porch enjoying a summer evening. Mrs. Patterson worked in her garden across the street, while neighborhood children played safely under restored streetlights. Our community had weathered a difficult storm but emerged stronger. The modest fee increase funded proper maintenance while remaining affordable for residents on fixed incomes. The power infrastructure now operated under proper inspection protocols, with certified professionals conducting regular maintenance. Our neighborhood never experienced another selective outage, but the memory of darkness falling at precisely the right moment served as a reminder that sometimes justice requires someone